about drop shotting first and all the different things we can do with it, and what kind of rods I use and how do I fish this differently than most other guys out there on the water. Because you know, everyone these days is probably fishing, has a drop shot tied on. The fish are going to seed a lot. You know, it's been around since probably the mid-90s. How do we change this rig up to work better than someone else's rig that's, you know, fishing in front of you on the same body of water? Well, I think the most important thing with a drop shot, the first thing you got to think about is your sinker size. What size of sinker are you going to use? What kind of sinker you're going to use, and then after that, maybe your leader length, and then maybe your bait. I've seen where, you know, I use quick drop drop shot sinkers, and basically they're just like a bass casting sinker, basically. But what I have on there is a clip, so you can just slide it on your line and clip it. One pocket, I'll have a pocket full of sinkers of different sizes, so I can sift through them and really see when I'm not getting bit. Maybe I'll switch to a lighter one, maybe I'll switch to a heavy one. I use them all the way from 3/4 ounce for smallmouth, all the way from 3/4 ounce when I'm fishing maybe 20 plus feet of water, and I've seen it really make a difference. I think that weight kind of calls them in. All the way down to a 1/16 ounce when the fish are maybe a little bit shallower or the fish are kind of suspended. Okay, so now that we got the sinker out of the way, the next thing is, okay, what kind of hook do I use? Well, for smallmouth, we're fishing mostly open water, so I use a size 4 split shot drop shot hook made by Gamakatsu. You say, why so small? Why don't you use a bigger size 4, bigger size, you know, 1 even, maybe a 1/0? I like the small size, mainly because the way that it hooks the fish. I've used a lot of those other sizes, and what happens if you can kind of see this in your head, when the fish goes ahead and grabs your bait, the smaller hook is actually going to start sliding out of their mouth first. So what happens is it hooks it in the first hard spot in their mouth, which happens to be the tooth plate in the top of their mouth. With those bigger hooks, they grab too early, and what they end up doing is catching the soft tissue in the roof of a fish's mouth. So you got to think, the gap's not wide enough to get to the bone. Okay, so what happens is it catches in that soft tissue, and then what happens is that fish starts shaking its head. You get those big head throbs. What happens is that tissue rips out, and out the mouth it comes. So you want to hook them in. So a lot of times those bigger hooks, I think what's going on, I lose a lot more fish on it, is that the hook's just catching it just a hair too quickly. It's getting into the fish too quickly. With this size 4, it has enough slide through its mouth that you can actually get them right behind the tooth plate in the front of their mouth. So now we're talking about, you know, line. What size line do you use for drop shotting? You know, for mainly smallmouth, I'll use anywhere from, I really like to use 4-pound test a lot, especially when there's no cover around. I fish a lot of the lakes that have docks and wood and grass in it. And you know, the only time I really don't like fishing 4-pound test is when there's really heavy grass, when I'm throwing into really heavy grass. But I think I get a lot more bites on high pressure lakes with a 4-pound test than say 6 or 8-pound test. I mean, it's day and night of how many more bites you will actually get. But for the most part, rule of thumb is that, you know, I really, you know, every day, I'll probably start with 6-pound test and then work my way up or down from there. So this is my 4-pound test rod. Like I said, a lot of times I go with 6, but 4-pound test seems to get me more bites, a lot more bites than a guy fishing 6-pound test and those more of a finicky fish. So you gotta think about the more finicky fish, the smarter ones are usually your bigger fish, correct? So I'm gonna catch a little bit bigger fish. The one trick to this is, okay, we're using this, you have to know how to back reel. You have to know how to fight fish on 4-pound test. Luckily, I grew up fishing 4-pound test. I've caught trout over 10 pounds on 4-pound test. I've caught smallmouth over 8 pounds on 4-pound test. So you have to know how to fight the fish. One good thing that you do need to learn how to do, and it wears the fish out a lot faster, and a lot of guys don't even do this with their 6-pound test, is that, I'm telling you, you can stop the fight and get the fish to the boat. It wears the fish out a little bit more efficiently, get them to the boat faster so not really hurting that fish, so it's not exerting itself. What you do is, have you ever noticed when the fish is kind of coming towards you, you actually want to put a little bit more pressure on them? And then when they take off, a lot of guys are down there fumbling with their drag, trying to loosen it up a little bit. Well, what I do is I have my drag tightened up to where when I'm set the hook, it's just a little bit below its breaking strength, okay? So when I'm out there shaking it, and the fish bites, I set the hook, I want the drag to slip a little bit, you know, I reel down and pull up as hard as I can. So it's gonna slip just a tad, you know, as tight as the point that I'd want it. And then what I'm gonna do is, when I hook that fish and it's down there digging it first, I reach back and hit my anti-reverse, okay? So when you hit that anti-reverse, when the fish wants to go, now you got a single action reel. When the fish wants to go, basically, you just hold on to the reel handle and let it go. You can do the pressure. But when the fish turns, you can put a lot more pressure on that fish, but if it all of a sudden turn and go back, your reel handle is going to automatically want to slip backwards. So, you know, that single tip right there will save you a lot of break-offs, a lot of heartache of breaking off these fish. Like, ooh. So, the next thing is, okay, so this is kind of your finesse, you know, smallmouth technique, and you can see on there I have a different kind of bait. It's more of a beaver bait, a little bit more action than, say, like your straight tail worm. Classically, a lot of guys when you're drop shotting want to fish, you know, a straight tail or more of a finesse style. We'll get into that in just a second. You know, we're not just talking drop shot for smallmouth here. We're going to talk drop shot for largemouth as well. It's really underrated, I think, especially up here in the Pacific Northwest. In California, they do it all the time, but up here it just doesn't seem like. This is 8-pound leader, and I got 20-pound braid right here, okay? The other thing I like to do is, since I have this braid that's 20-pound test, I can throw it in the bushes, right? What I'll do is I just step up my leader size to 15, okay? But what I can do with this 20-pound test, I can cast it on spinning gear. Have you ever tried to cast 15-pound test on a spinning rod? You can't do it, okay? But if you go to 20-pound braid, it's like 8-pound, 6-pound diameter, so you can cast it just fine. You just up your leader material, and then you have a thing that's not going to break off in the bushes. Now that being said, since we're going to throw this in the bushes and different other cover, you want a stout rod. You know, a lot of guys say with a drop shotting you have to have this extra fast action with this light limber tip. For this kind of fishing, you don't want that. You want a rod that's going to pull the fish out of the bushes. Now the next thing is, okay, we're going to throw it in the bushes. So what kind of hook are you going to use? You know, a lot of guys use just offset worm hooks, which is the ones that have a 90-degree bend. That 90-degree bend holds your worm on. There's a couple things wrong with that, trying to drop shot with that line through the eye and it being suspended. What ends up happening is that offset makes your worm spiral. When you reel it in, it spirals. When it drops, it spirals. And you don't want all that spiraling action, especially when you're fishing bushes or whatever and you're pitching a drop shot in there. You know, you're pitching it in there. You don't want it to spiral down to the bottom. So a lot of times with that hook, it doesn't work all that great. So what I use is a company makes them, but I actually make it my own. Basically all it is a straight shank worm hook, okay? So the next thing is, the other great thing about the straight shank hook is when you Texas rig it, so you pull it down through an angle, right? What's going to happen when you Texas rig it, you poke it back through the worm and you leave it in the center of the worm, that hook point's pointed right at the back of the worm, correct? So it follows the same angle that you put it in. So when you set the hook, where's that hook point going? Right into the roof of the fish's mouth. Okay, now think about this for a second. Bear with me. You got a 90-degree bend in your hook, correct? Like the offsets we're talking about before? You got a 90-degree bend, right? So where's your hook point going to be lined up with? That 90-degree bend. So it's going to be parallel, following the same line as your worm is, correct? So when you set the hook, where's that hook point pointed towards? Out the fish's mouth, okay? So with a straight shank worm hook, you're actually going to get a better hook set on the fish as well. Now the next thing to talk about is, okay, sinker size for flipping in the cover. My one rule of thumb is if I'm flipping in the cover, bushes, reeds, cattails, lily pads, whatever, if I'm throwing a 3/8 ounce jig in there, you know, I usually go with my jig sizes, I want it big enough to fall through whatever I'm throwing at, correct? Well, my rule of thumb is a drop shot hangs up, okay? So say if we throw into some branches and your sinker goes through, your sinker is always going to go through, okay? But look, the sinker goes through, but it's not enough weight to pull the worm down. So if I'm throwing a 1/2 ounce jig, my rule of thumb is to go one size heavier on my drop shot sinker. So I'll actually go to a 3/4 ounce drop shot sinker.